Well, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Today we're going to be talking about line loops. So we'll just dive right into it. So what exactly are line loops? We'll get right into that in a bit. Let's start with the agenda first. So the first thing we're going to show or talk about is the explanation of line loops. What can they be used for? How can line loops help you? We'll get into some practical use case demos, and then we'll end things off with a Q&A and summary. So to kick things off, what exactly is a line loop? It's really just a tool to validate data on document lines. So we're going to be using the B1UP add-on, and with that add-on comes a tool called line loops. So think of line loops as a way to check information on each row of a document. So you define the criteria on the rows that you want to check for. So for example, is there a missing price? Did we forget a warehouse, et cetera, et cetera. So it's another way, one way to think about it is it's a second pair of eyes, kind of like using a spell checker on a Word document. We just want to make sure there are no mistakes, because let's be honest, how many times have we sent out a quote or a sales order with incorrect information that's resulted in possibly a return, a credit memo, and an unhappy customer? So we're going to look at how line loops can kind of mitigate those situations. So what are some common use cases and how can line loops help you? Number one, it can check for missing data. So like I said earlier, let's say, for example, we have a document, a sales order, and for whatever reason, we forgot to put some information on a row. Well, a line loop is literally going to loop through every single line on that document to check if there's missing data. But it can also check for incorrect data. So let's say, for example, a user entered an illegal discount. It can check to see if that discount is illegal, and it can call a pop-up message, for example, or block that sales order from being added into the system altogether. It can also automatically insert data. So let's say, for example, we want to insert a sample item or a free gift or a freight charge item. It can automatically, based on your specific rules, insert data, and we'll take a look at that today. It can also collect data. So think of the line loop. Let's say, for example, we have an order with weight on each row. It can actually collect the data from each row, the weight, and it can add all that weight together. It can sum it, and it can even transfer data, collect data from rows and transfer it to other documents. So let's say, for example, I have information on a sales order, and I want to transfer information on those rows from the sales order to maybe a purchase order. And the best thing about it is that you control the information. You have control over the rules and the conditions about your line loop logic. Okay. So let's get into a line loop demo. The first scenario we're going to look at is check for any missing data on a document. And just so everybody's aware, hopefully you've done or you've seen a previous demo or webinar on universal functions and macros. It'll just help make this session a little bit more informative, and it'll make more sense to you. So what I mean by that, by macros, is just sets of instructions, little pieces of instructions that we tell the system to do. So these line loops are going to call macros, such as a pop-up, right? And so if you haven't seen those demos, just go onto our website or go onto YouTube and look up the previous webinars on B1UP macros. Okay, so let's go right into SAP. I'm going to pull up a sales order. So here's a sales order. You can see I've got 3 lines, and we're going to check for missing information. For example, let's say for whatever reason, the user accidentally forgot to put in a price. Maybe there wasn't a price associated with the price list. Maybe the user accidentally typed 0 in the unit price field. And so now I'm left with row 1 without a price. Well, I want a line loop to go sift through every single line and check if there's any unit prices with a blank or a 0 unit price. The trigger for the line loop is whenever I click on the update button or the add button on the bottom left. So if I click on the update button here, I'm actually going to get a prompt, a system message that says the following rows do not have a price. And it even tells me the exact row. So it says row 1. So I have a couple of options here. I can click yes to proceed, or I can click on no to enter a price. If I click on yes, it's just going to allow that sales order to go through without a unit price, right? If I clicked on no, it would actually block the sales order from going through and it would force the user to put in a unit price. One thing I also want to show is that a line loop can actually identify more than one row. So let's say, for example, on row 3, I don't have a price in that field either, and I click on update. Sorry. Let's take a look at here. Oh, I think I know what I did wrong here, and I forgot to append it. So let me just click on. Let me just correct that for 1 second. Click my validation here. Sorry about that. Give me 1 second. Okay, I'm just gonna uncheck that break loop. Okay, so let's go through that one more time. So let's go back to our sales order. In this case, I don't actually want to have unit prices in any of my rows. So I'm going to click on update. And it actually identifies every row that's offending without a price. It tells me row 1, 2, and 3 are without a price. Do I want to proceed? In this instance, I'm going to click on no. And I'm going to enter a price now. So let's say, for example, on row 1, I enter $1,500. On row 2, I enter $1,000, but I leave row 3 blank. It's going to continue to loop and still check if there's a row without a price. Now, what you saw me do there was I unchecked a box called break loop. Now let's go into that. Let's take a look at the logic behind this line loop. So if I minimize this and go back into my B1 validation, I have something called check for rows without a price. This is my validation. If I drill into it, it's going to put my validation configuration screen. So this initial screen here, there's a couple of things we need to know here. The form type, we're looking at form 139, which is a sales order. And we're looking at the add update button is basically our trigger, right? So remember, if I click on the add or update button, whenever I add, click OK or update, in this case, I'm saying all of those things. When I click on it, it's going to invoke this universal function. In other words, my line loop. It's just going to go straight to this line loop here called universal function 5. So this is my line loop window where it has all the conditions and logic regarding my line loop. So I've given it a title, check for rows without a price, and the type in this case is a line loop, right? So for universal functions, you can create macros, crystal reports, dashboards, et cetera, et cetera. In this case, we're only concerned with line loops. We're going to create a line loop. I've given it a remark as well, check for rows without a price. The line item user unit ID is 38. So if I click on here, the reason it's 38, and let me just kind of digress for a second in case you're wondering why is it 38. So if I go, for example, into a sales order or any marketing document like a purchase order, sales order, and I turn on my system information, right? Scroll to my last order. If I hover my mouse over the item number field, look at the bottom left corner where it says item equals 38, right? The 38 pertains to this field right here, right? If I were to, or to this row here. And that's what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned about the rows on sales orders or in any document. So if I go back to my universal function screen, I have a couple of options. I can pick document lines. I can pick if it would be number 39 if it was document service lines. It would be number 37 if I was in a production order. Number 13, item 13 if I was in inventory goods receipt or a goods issue. Number 23 for an inventory transfer, and number 76 for journal entry lines, and XX for others. So in this case, I want to look at document lines in my line loop. So I'm going to keep it at 38. A couple of checkboxes here, or a few checkboxes here. I want to ignore the last line on a sales order. In this particular case, the reason why, so let's say, for example, I go back to my sales order here. By default, when we enter a sales order, or while we're in the process of adding a sales order, the cursor always comes back, or puts the cursor back into the last line. And the last line here is always blank. So we want to ignore that. We don't care about this blank line. We only care about the lines that have data in it. And so that's why we say ignore the last line. And we want to freeze during the line loop just so that the screen doesn't flicker and it's stable. And we want to ignore the text lines and subtotal lines in the document. So for example, if I were to create a text line or a subtotal line, I don't want the line loop to look at these lines here. I don't care about that. I only care about the rows with actual data in them. So I'm going to delete those rows because I don't care about them. All right. So I'll just maximize this. So we have a SQL condition here. And the SQL condition is basically saying, hey, if 38.14.number, which is basically the sales unit price field, is equal to 0. In other words, if the unit price has no price and the item code is not equal to a gift item, because we don't want this to run if there's already a gift item code in that row, then we're going to select a result called is 0. So I have a result called is 0, and it's going to basically look for rows without any unit price. And this special keyword here called line num is basically just going to identify the specific rows that are offending. And I'm going to append to that row. I'm going to, so in my pop-up message, it tells me row 1 is without a price, row 2 is without a price, and I'm going to append it. You also have the option to break the loop. So what you saw in my instance, and the example I showed you, was that it showed you, it sifted through every single row and it identified all the offending rows without a price. If I said break loop, if I check this box, then it's going to check one at a time. And then when I click update or add again on the bottom left of the sales order, it's going to check for the next line that's offending. So let's take a look at the break loop. Let's see how that works. I'm going to update that. And I'm going to go back into our sales order here. So let's say, for example, I have no prices. It's going to say, instead of previously spitting back all the rows that are offending, it's first telling me row 1 doesn't have a price. Do you want to proceed? No, so I put in a unit price in row 1. I say update, and now it's going to go to the next line. Row 2 doesn't have a price. I say no, I put in another price, and so on, right? Until there's no more rows without a price. So why would I want to break a loop? Well, let's say, for example, I had thousands of lines on the sales order. That would mean my line loop would have to sift through 1,000 lines, and then my pop-up message would be a long string, and it would tell me, you have 1,000 lines, row 1, row 2, row 3, et cetera, all the way to 1,000 have lines without a price. That might take a long time. It might put strain on the system. So you would want to, in that case, you might want to break the loop so it just does it one at a time, and it sifts through the next line that's offending. Then you correct that line, then it sifts through the next line, and then you correct that line, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So let's go back to our universal function window here, or our B1 validation. Okay, so in this case, I'll leave it unchecked because I'm not dealing with 1,000 rows. I'm only dealing with maybe 10, 20 rows. So I would like to have it append and tell me which rows are offending all together in one pop-up screen. So if this condition is true, right, if it's not empty, then I want to call a universal function, which is my prompt, right? I want to prompt that pop-up message to say this following message. The following rows do not contain a price. The LL string is basically my keyword string that tells me the exact rows that are offending. And then I have another message that says click yes to proceed, click no to enter a price, right? If they click on no, it's going to block the event altogether. They won't be able to get out of that sales order, right? If this box is checked and they click on no, right? So that was an example of, a macro or a universal function that the line loop calls, right? So in other words, if the row is without a price, call this universal function to prompt the user to enter a price. All right. Sometimes we don't just want to check for missing information, but we also want to check for incorrect information. So how many times have you had a salesperson incorrectly input an illegal discount, right? Out of the box with SAP, you could run an approval procedure that looks at discounts at the document level. So for example, if I put an illegal discount at the document level, let's say 25%, it'll invoke an approval procedure where the manager has to approve it, but that's only looking at a discount at the document level. But what if a user enters an illegal discount at the line level? How do we prevent that, right? So we would use a line loop for that. We would use a line loop to look at every single line that has an illegal discount, right? So again, we're not just looking for missing information like this one here. Let's just put a price in here, but we're also looking for incorrect information. So let's say, for example, I put in a discount of 25% or higher. So I actually have a rule that says prevent a sales order from being added if there is a discount of 25% or higher. So let's turn on that rule. Let's just close this. So if I'm going to right click here and I'm going to go to edit B1 validation configuration. And you'll see I've got something called, on the last line here, number 13, a line loop, prompt if discount is greater or equal to 25%. So let's update that. And let's put in a discount of 25% or higher. And I update this. So now I've got a pop-up message that says, check discount on row 1. You are not authorized to discount 25% or higher, decrease discount, or you're dead, right? So you can have fun with it. You can put in whatever, whatever prompt you want. But in this case, there is no option for yes or no. I've actually selected a macro where the pop-up only allows the user, it forces the user to correct the price, or correct the discount, I should say, in this case, right? So they cannot leave the sales order without correcting the discount. So I click on OK. I say, oh, I meant to put in 5%, right? So now I update, and the sales order is okay to go, okay? So let's just take a quick look at how we got to that discount rule. So let's drill into number 13 here. Okay, so again, we have our descriptions up here. It's a line loop. We're looking at number 38, rows on documents. We have a SQL condition here where 38.15.number. Again, let's take a look at that, because I know some people are wondering, well, what is 38.15.number? Well, that is the discount field, right? If I were to go into the sales order and I look at the discount field here, where is it? Here we go, 5%. Look at the bottom left. It says item 38, column 15, right? So the discount field is column 15. So this is what I'm looking at, right? You could also right click here and you can say copy system information, and you'll get the syntax right here, the dynamic syntax, which is, you know, $ bracket, $ 38.15.number, right? So if you copy that, you can insert that or paste that right into your B1UP line loop screen here. So I pasted that right here. So when the discount field is greater than or equal to 25, and the item code is not equal to the gift code, the gift item code, because I don't want a gift item code because it doesn't have a price, then I'm going to select this high discount rule, this result here. So the high discount rule is going to be called, and it's going to tell me which rows are offending. So remember this one, this specific keyword here, line num, tells me which specific rows are offending without a price. And I'm going to say, well, execute if that rule is not empty, and call this universal function. So call this prompt right here. So check the discount on the rule that you are not authorized to discount 25% or higher, right? And I'm blocking that event. So I'm blocking the user from, you know, adding that particular order if that discount is greater than, equal than 25% or higher, I should say. Okay. So moving along, let's go back to our PowerPoint here. So we checked for missing data. We also checked for incorrect data. But what if we want to automatically insert a line? So a common use case for this is we want to give a customer a free gift or a sample item if they meet a specific rule. So let's say, for example, the customer spends over $1,000. Well, we want to give them a free gift. And the nice thing about this line loop is that the system can automatically insert that line for you so that you don't have to remember to do it. Because let's face it, we're only human, right? Sometimes we forget to do things, right? So we can improve our effectiveness and efficiency if we can automatically insert lines and prevent any mishaps. So let's go back to SAP. And let's turn on that rule. Let's close this. So again, at the bottom, we want to insert a free gift if they spend over $1,000. So let's turn on that rule. Add a free gift, right? So let's update this order, for example, just so that we can trigger the add and update button. So let's just change the price here, right? Just so we can get our update button. And we click on update, and it says this customer is eligible for a free 6-pack of beer. This item will be added to the order automatically. We say okay. And just like that, it inserts a 6-pack of beer on the last row, okay? So it's just a really great way to automate certain things and so that we don't forget to do things, right? So let's take a look at that particular line loop and how that works. So again, we're going to go into our B1 validation screen. Oh, I think I closed it. We're going to drill into this one here, add a free gift. This one's a unique one. I did this one on purpose. So what I wanted to do was I actually wanted to invoke a line loop based on the subtotal field on the header. So what I mean by that is instead of summing the totals here, doing a line loop to say, okay, add this row plus this row plus this row, and if the total is over whatever, $1,000, add a free gift. Instead of doing a line loop on each row, I simply said, hey, why not just look at this field, the subtotal field on the total document. So if the subtotal is over $1,000, then insert this line loop, right? So in this case, this line loop really is about inserting an extra line, automating a process to insert a line based on a condition that looks at the header information. So if we go back, we can see here, we have a case here. So we're looking at the 22 dot number. So this is the subtotal field on the header. If it's greater than 1,000, then it's going to invoke this condition here, and it's going to run this universal function, which is my line loop. And this line loop is going to insert a row with a free gift. So in this case, it's when the item code is equal to gift, then select item exists on row from dummy, right? And what we're going to do is we're going to have two condition here, two final results here. So the first thing it's going to look at is universal function, in this case, number 7, actually. It's going to prompt the user, right? It's going to prompt this user with a message saying this customer is eligible for a free 6-pack of beer. This item will be added to the order automatically. And then it's going to invoke another universal function that actually inserts the free gift item code on the row, right? So we're going to set the last row with this gift item code. We have an item called gift 01. So let's take a look at that one more time. Let's take a look at our sales order one more time. Right? So this item code, right? If we don't want to insert this item code if it's already on the sales order, right? We don't want to insert it twice. So it's looking to see if this item code already exists on the sales order. If it does, it's not going to insert it. It's not going to prompt us. But if it doesn't, it's going to take a look at this condition here. If it's over $1,000, it's going to insert this gift item code on the last row of our sales order. Okay. Another thing we can do is collect data, right? So this was a condition actually, let's go take a step back here. Let's do a line loop that inserts a gift based on information on the row. So this current line loop is looking at information on the header or the footer. Let's look at information on the row to insert a gift code. So let's take a look. Let's go to our B1 validation. Let's actually turn off this one, add a free gift. And let's turn on this one called add a gift item code if the customer buys 10 or more of a specific item. So let's delete this row here. Right? And what I'm looking for now is if I want to do a line loop that looks at information on the rows. So in this case, if the quantity, let's say, for example, they buy 10 of these Samsung notebooks. Well, based on that information, I want to insert a gift. If I say update, it's going to insert a gift on the last row as well. So that's an example of inserting information on a row based on information at the row level versus at the header level. Okay, I'm going to say update. Now, let's go back to our PowerPoint here. Oh, sorry. Let's go back to our PowerPoint. And let's calculate some line data. So a common example of collecting data and calculating line data might be if I want to calculate maybe the weight on a sales order and insert a line if my criteria is met. So let's say, for example, we sell items to a customer, and if the total weight on that order is less than 100 kilograms, then when we want to charge the customer freight, and we want to insert a freight line at the bottom of our sales order, right? So let's go back to SAP. There's been a lot of instances where we've forgotten to charge customer freight. So we want to automate that based on our condition here. So let's go back to our B1 validations. And just to see it in action, maybe what we'll do is we'll turn off some of these other ones just so you can see it better. This one here, add freight to sales order row. So this is going to add freight if the total weight is less than 100 kilograms. So if we look at our sales order, we have a column called weight. And I can see, what is this, 33 kilograms, 28, yep. So let's say it's 33 kilograms currently, so it's not enough, right? I want to, let's update this with the price just to change our OK button to update. So let's change this to 1500. We have an update. So the update is going to trigger that line loop. We get a prompt that says weight is less than 100 kilograms. Do you want to add a freight charge? If I say no, it's just going to go without a freight charge. If I say yes, it's going to add a freight charge at the last line. Okay. So what if my weight is already over 100 kilograms, right? So let's just say I go in here and I alter the weight. Let's say I buy 100 of these, right? So my weight is over 100 kilograms. If I click on update, I'm no longer going to get that prompt, right? And that's because it only cares if the weight is over 100 kilograms, or I should say less than 100 kilograms. If it's over 100 kilograms, it's not going to invoke that line loop to insert a freight charge. So let's take one last look at the B1 validation for our freight. Okay. Okay, so we have our case here. It's when the item code is not equal to freight, then we want to select this result here. Weight is low. So I gave this result a name called weight is low, right? And it's going to sum this field. So 38.58.number. How do we get that field? How do we know what that field is again? So let's take a look. Go back to our sales order. If we hover our mouse over the weight field, you'll see that it is 38.58. Again, we can right click here. We can say copy system information, and it's going to tell me what the dynamic syntax is for that particular field is, 38.58, right? So let's go back. Oops. We want our universal function. So it's going to sum that row, right? I don't want to break that loop. So if that condition is met, where the sum is greater or less than, in this case, the number, the result, the weight field is less than 100, then I'm going to call this universal function, right? Which is basically a prompt. And it says, weight is less than 100 kilograms. Do you want to add freight? And then it calls another universal function 11 and then universal function 14. So let's take a look. What is universal function 11 and what is universal function 14? So universal function 11 is basically a macro that sets the last row with this item code. And universal function 14 is basically telling the system to click on the last row. In other words, move the cursor, automatically insert that cursor into the item code field on the last row. Okay. So you can see after I inserted that and added that freight charge, I just basically want the cursor to appear here, and that's what it does. Okay. So these are some common use case examples of how line loops can really automate information, check for information, check to see if you're missing anything, if you've got any incorrect data. Today was like sort of a high level overview of line loops. I just want to get you guys introduced to line loops. We're kind of building on the last webinar we did on universal functions and macros. And now that you've got kind of a good background or baseline on line loops, the next session I have to do in the future on line loops will be a little bit more technical, a little bit more deeper. Okay, so key points to take home. You can reduce costly human errors, reduce the number of returns and credits you issue to customers due to mistakes. You can increase efficiency because you're automating certain things in your system, right? Whether it's automatically inserting lines and checking for incorrect data. And you're overall increasing customer satisfaction, right? No more mistakes or less mistakes. So with that, that concludes today's session on line loops. So if anybody has any questions, I'd like to open up the floor.
Thanks, Jerwin.
Any questions, Lisa?
I don't see any at this point. I just want to give a minute or so just to see if anyone was going to type anything, but I'm not seeing any. Great presentation.
Cool. I mean, I have my contact information below, so if anybody wants to get a hold of me with any questions they have later on, feel free to do so. Happy to help.
Perfect. Thank you everyone for attending today. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording on our website. Feel free to share that with anyone on your team that you think might benefit. When the session ends, you'll see a short survey display in your browser window. If you could take a minute to fill that in and let us know how we did and what you would like to see in the future webinars, we really appreciate that feedback. Thanks again for attending, and we hope to see you at next month's webinar.